Welcome to the meeting of the Laguna Beach Historical Society. My name is Ed Stork. I'm the president-elect of the society. Our esteemed leader, Dr. McElroy, is not here tonight, unfortunately, but I'll try to fill in for him. We're glad to have you here. First, I'd like to have any members of the board that are present today. Would you stand up, please, so some people can see you? Some have name tags and some don't. I was going to say the board members who aren't here don't have to stand up, but it's not funny anymore, so I'll skip that part. We're glad you're here tonight. The Historical Society is changing the membership system somewhat, and we're going to an annual membership that coincides with the calendar year. So everybody's memberships are due, and there's different categories. Johanna Ellis, who's in the back there, has the membership forms. She can take it by credit card, cash, or check. She has her credit card operation right here tonight. In fact, I already did my membership here tonight. And so she can take your membership tonight, and we appreciate that. The society runs completely on memberships and donations. And as you probably have seen, we've had a little upset lately to the building, although soon, hopefully, the reconstruction will begin, and the insurance company will pay for most of that. But we need a new roof, and there's some other needs for the society, and we ask you to join with us in membership and donations. The next general meeting of the Laguna Beach Historical Society will be on March 10th, and there'll be more information about that in our newsletter. Without any further ado, then, I'd like to introduce our speaker for tonight. Paul Workman became the chief of police in Laguna Beach in May of 2009, and he worked his way through the ranks. He's been here quite a while. During his 37 years in Laguna, he served under 5 other police chiefs before assuming his place as the 15th leader of the police department. He grew up in Orange County. He graduated from Buena Park High School. I won't tell you when. He served over 7 years in the United States Air Force Reserves, and the National Guard. He began his career at Laguna Beach as a reserve police officer not too long after he graduated from high school. He also graduated from the Golden West College Criminal Justice Training Center, and therefore shares education with many of his recruits. In the early 1980s, he worked as a tactical officer at the Saddleback College Reserve Academy. In the police department, he's worked in just about every division of the police department on his way to the top. And he was promoted to the command level in 1989. In addition to earning his bachelor's degree in criminal justice from Cal State in Fullerton, Chief Workman is a graduate of the prestigious FBI National Academy and the Post Command College. Paul and his wife Valerie are working hard to put their 2 daughters through college and a 3rd through high school. You all know what that's like. Yeah. So he's an instrument-rated pilot and owns a plane as well. And from my experience with the police department, I'm sure many of you have more than that, he's the leader that has a lot to do with the good morale and the politeness and the efficiency and the just general good attitude of our officers here locally. And in what is sometimes not an easy situation because of all the tourists we have, I think they react marvelously. And so it was with great privilege that I introduce you, Chief of Police of Laguna Beach, Paul Workman. Thank you.
Where you got all that information. I've been with the department since 1975. I got out of the Air Force and I was a technician. I worked on autopilots in the Air Force and thought I'd be in technology. Went through a TV repair course, and boy, I'm glad I didn't go into that as a business. And I thought I'd take a couple of college classes in Santa Ana and took a class on the introduction to criminal justice, and they wanted us to go on a ride-along. And I called all over the county. Nobody had ride-alongs, but Laguna did. And I came down, and I went on a ride-along, and I was hooked. And that was in 1974. And then when they were looking for reserve officers, I applied, and I got a reserve position. So I've Been here ever since and love it. And it's been a great town, and the community here is awesome. We've got a good town to be an employee in. I mean, I've really liked living here, and I liked working here for 40 years. So let me move along on to the topic here. This has been quite a journey for me. I have to tell you that our department, for some reason, didn't keep any historical information at all. And I think a lot of it was when I first started, you know, we had people around like George Pletz had retired, but he was still in town, and Vic Sagan, and they knew everything. They knew what happened and everything. Well, people start passing away, and all of a sudden you've lost those histories. And now I'm sitting here, you know, for the last couple of years, wishing I had that information, and I'm so happy. I started doing some work, and there's so much stuff out there that at least helps you reconstruct a framework. And when I'm done with this, I've asked your president to share my email with anybody that would like to kind of set up a time that has some historical connection with the PD that can tell me and fill in blanks. I know the two of you do, and because it really helps a lot, because there's people I don't know who they are that are in pictures, and there's little blank areas, but in the last couple of years I've learned a lot of new information. And I met with Neil Purcell. He was the longest standing chief on the department for 15 years. He was here yesterday, and I was talking to him. He didn't know any of this information, and he was a chief here for a long time. So I think that's kind of sad, and for our organization, I want to put something together that's lasting, and I'll share it with the Historical Society, but it'll be based kind of on what you'll see tonight. And I'm working on a history of the PD from the mid-20s all the way up to 1953 when Gordon French was killed and they built the new building. And I'll let somebody else tackle that next section, or I'll go crazy and do it myself. But let me get started with my presentation tonight. And whoops, I hit the wrong button, didn't I? I've got these little funky pictures I'll flip through that you've all probably seen some of these already. My first slide is of a man that I call the mystery officer. This picture, these two pictures have been hanging on the wall my whole career here. And I asked Neil Purcell if he had any idea who the guy was, and he goes, no, that damn picture's been here forever, and we don't know who he is. And I'm thinking, is he even in Laguna Beach? And I took the frame apart. It's very old. The paper just fell apart on the back. There's no notes in there. There's nothing written on the back of the pictures. I had no idea who this guy was. And I've always wanted to know, and I just gave up. But this is my little hook here to keep you. This is my mystery officer. Let me get into the department. Forest Avenue from up on the hill here. I think that's Forest and Highway, am I correct? There's the gate, a little aerial view. This is called mood photographs. Get you in the mood, take you back, take you way back. See that little bump in the middle? That's an interesting thing. If anybody knows what that, I know what it's for, but I'll be curious. I pulled the resolution up that enacted the police department. It's resolution number 2 by the Laguna Beach City Council, and at the time they called themselves the Board of Trustees, I think, which I thought was kind of interesting. And I think several of them were in the Chamber of Commerce that got involved in the initial setup of the City Council and the city government. Abe Johnson was appointed to be the chief of police, and he was allowed to hire an assistant. His starting pay was $175, and he could hire an assistant chief for $150 a month. So he was just rolling in cash, let me tell you, folks. I'm sorry, it was January, I can't see. It was 1927, but it was July something right in the beginning of 1927. This is a picture of that they posed for evidently, and there's a follow-up picture right behind it. It looks like the same day they got together. Chief Johnson hired Arthur Stromerson, who's the man in the middle, as a daytime police officer / traffic officer. He rode a motorcycle. He had the authority to hire night staff, which he did that first summer. He hired 2 officers. See if I can find their names. Well, let me talk about Abe a little bit. I found out he owned a horse ranch out in a town called Myford, and I think, where in the hell is Myford, California? And a little more research, I find out it was part of Irvine, which many of you probably already know. He had a horse ranch. There's ads that appear in the Santa Ana Register quite frequently for a horse for sale, and has his name on it. And then, there's other articles that refer to Abe Johnson's ranch. But at the same time, and I don't know when he actually bought the house in Laguna Beach, but I know he lived at 335 Myrtle Street and had 4 children. He got married to Jenny Wayman in Missouri, in Kirksville, in 1895. And I don't know the exact year, but it said a short time later they moved to Orange County and had been here up until Abe Johnson's death. The man on the left, I have a photograph of him, and it has a label that says Ben W. Elliott. And I cannot find any record that this guy actually existed in the 20s, so I'm not sure, or the 30s, so I'm not sure if that's his real name. Art Stromerson is a valid name, and he did exist. The 2 men he hired that first summer was a gentleman named E.P. Hatton and C.T. Carmichael, and they would do a night patrol. And then right after Labor Day, they were let go, just like we do today. We hire a lot of extra help, and right after Labor Day, bye guys, we're done with you. Art Stromerson came from a big family in South Dakota, and he had a brother, Walter Stromerson. Art and his brother had both been in the Army, and they were both horsemen. I know they rode and were probably pretty good at riding, which maybe kind of led me to believe maybe there was a connection between the Stromersons and Abe Johnson because he owned this horse ranch. And I found some articles where they were competing in polo and something called push ball, which evidently didn't catch on. There was an article from 1925 where the prohibition inspector was going to planning an arrest, and in the article, and this is before the police department started, in the article it says Art Stromerson and his brother Walter accompanied the inspector during the arrest. And I know just from classes I've taken and historical information about law enforcement, it wasn't uncommon, and you see it sometime in the Western movie, where I need a few of you boys to come and give me a hand. And the sheriff would drag off a group of 5 guys to go chase somebody down. So I don't think that was unusual in those days because there probably wasn't a lot of money around to pay for law enforcement. So when you knew you were going to arrest somebody and you knew you needed some help, you probably, found a couple of good guys to go with you. These guys had been in the Army. They probably had a good reputation, so they accompanied him on the arrest. So later on, it's no surprise that Abe Johnson would have hired him as a police officer. In 1929, Art got in a motorcycle accident on Coast Highway and slid into 2 parked cars and ended up with a skull fracture. The first newspaper report the next day reported it as a fatal accident. But by Monday, they said he would recover and he would be fine. When he came back to work, there's this great clip in the Register how, and this is based on a hearing the city council had, Abe Johnson and him get into a fight, an argument in public, and Art apparently unleashes a lot of profanity at the chief, and the chief ends up firing him. The council decides to have an appeal hearing and invites Art to the council meeting if he would like to try to keep his job, and he did. He came, and the city council overturned the chief's decision to fire him. But I got a kick out of that guy out in the street yelling at his boss. Art left the department in 1934. On his draft card, when back during World War I, he had on there that he was a butcher. So I find some documentation that he ended up on a cruise ship called the Ruth Alexander, and his occupation was second butcher. So he decided he had enough police work and went back to being a butcher. Art's younger brother, Walter, was in the Army, stationed at Fort MacArthur when he married Abe Johnson's daughter, Mary, in 1920. Walter was a cartoonist and had gained some notoriety in Laguna Beach for his work. After Abe and Art had left the department, Walter was hired as a motorcycle officer and worked for the police department from 1939 to 1941. And I know we have a relative here of Dick Smith. She brought him down here, and I'm sorry, your name? Carolyn. Was he your grandfather?
That's my dad.
Oh, he's your dad. Okay, I just that was actually. I was deferring to the being nice, and he was your grandfather, right? Anyway, Dick was a very nice man. She brought him. He actually came to one of our awards banquets, and I got to talk to him a little bit. Originally I thought he had only worked at the department for a couple of years, and I found plenty of documentation that he was an employee here from 1931 to 1938. He probably worked at the bar and worked, I can see him doing both things, I would think. And his dad owned the Coast Inn. And that picture there, I didn't want to take it out of the frame because we have it put in there really nice, and I didn't want to break it apart. But it's a great picture. If you get into the police station, we're having an open house on May 16th, and you can walk around and look at some of our pictures. Actually, any of you are welcome to schedule time if you want to come in and look. I know Jane Jantz had come in about 10 years ago, and I showed her around a little bit. Get a new page here. So Chief Johnson was the chief from July 20th, 1927 until July 11th, 1938. During that time, they only increased his pay $10. I thought that was kind of he suddenly resigned, and in the article it says without any explanation. But I think there was a behind-the-scenes explanation because they were recruiting and looking around for a chief. But there was no explanation given at the council meeting, so the press didn't know. The council just lavished accolades on him, what a great man he was, and they gave him a month's pay extra. Just as a gift from the city. They promised to find him some work still connected with the city to stay in the city family. He ended up being the city license collector. The only issue was he passed away 2 years later, so I imagine he was probably having some health issues and decided to step down as chief. The census at that time, 1930, under 2,000 people living in Laguna Beach. Each 10 years I'll give the census figure so we can keep in perspective how big the community was at the time. The next chief was a fellow named Gene Woods, and he had been the chief of police in San Marino. He'd also done some other management level work up in the Los Angeles area for different law enforcement related organizations. He had studied under a fellow named August Vollmer, who had a very big reputation in the country as a criminologist up at Berkeley, and had started the first criminal justice program in the nation. So he had these credentials. The article says Chief Woods is leaving the position after a year of turbulent service in which his tenure was made one of difficulty by residents who resented action of the council in bringing in an outside man to replace Chief Johnson. So this poor guy worked 11 months and the community ran him out of town. I thought that was kind of an interesting historical note. This is my next photograph. This is a group picture in front of the old police station. I can't verify it's 1939, but all indications are it is. One of the neat things is Joanna had sent me this clip that she had in a folder at the Historical Society, and when I looked at this picture I realized it was taken later in the same day. It's all the same people, and I'm just screaming because it's degraded because it was like a newsprint type thing, and I wish I had the original picture. I would love to have that photograph. Because it's that same day and it's a little later and it's the same number of officers and everybody's standing around. And I don't know how they caught the picture, just kind of a casual thing. I've identified most of these fellas. Ed Hobart's over on the left. We have a relative of Ed's here. And the two guys on the left there, I could not figure out who they were, and I don't have any other photographs of them. And then the guy on the right, that's obviously a motorcycle officer. I'm not sure who he is. I think that's Dick Smith. He's the one F on there. So what do you think? Is that, what's that? No, I put that on there. I think that's Dick Smith, but I'm not 100% sure. And that's the, which one? That's Eddie Hernandez. Okay, how about the other two guys on the left? I got the names. That one of them's Edgar Ropp, one's Glenn Walters. Oh, I've got George Ritchie. I don't have Eddie Hernandez on here, but that doesn't mean it's not him because okay, so you think that's Eddie Hernandez on the right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. So that'll move the date of the picture a little bit, because if Eddie Hernandez either hadn't been on the department or had left the department when I thought this picture was taken, because I have a lot of historical information on when people were hired and when they left the department. For a long time, whenever they hired somebody or gave a pay change, they'd do a resolution and list all the police employees, and they did that up into the 40s, in the early 40s, and they stopped doing it. And I'm like, no, what's the matter with you people? So I have some great records. That's how I found out that Dick Smith had actually worked a lot longer. Oh, that's a roof fedora up there. I'm looking at this picture, and I look up and I see this hat sitting up there, and I'm like, what in the world? And off the left you'll see a ladder. I guess somebody was going to get it, but they didn't get up there and take it down. So that's my little sense of humor, the roof fedora. Kind of keeps the sun off the roof. Chief Jack Blakeney, from 1939 till 1942 was the chief, and he actually got a little bit of a pay increase up to $220 a month. He's the first Laguna Beach officer to attend the FBI Academy, which also turns out to be his downfall a little later. I found this little article that Chief Blakeney's the same Blakeney who played halfback and captained one of Tex Oliver's strongest Santa Ana high school football teams in 1927. And it says another member of that team, Jim Musick, also went into law enforcement. Well, Jim Musick became the sheriff of Orange County. The location of the police station, this is shot from about the era that I'm thinking of, and the fire station, of course, is right where it is today. And if you go down Loma on the right, the current police department's there on the left side of the street. If you stand on our front steps and look across the street, the police station was directly across from it. And I was told, George Pletz had written a kind of a short historical thing, and he said it was actually a converted garage that they had moved into. The open doors, of course, the front door to the police station. The address was 304 3rd Street, but it was located on, you know, your garage is the same address as your home. So if you walk through the lobby, the picture on the left is what you would see. You would walk through that door, and there would be the counter on your left. And then on the other side of the counter looking out is the little radio center there where they had the phone and the radio equipment. This, I'm not sure what's going on here. This thing looks like somebody just backed the skip loader up and dropped the jail cells out in a muddy old dirty field, and Abe comes walking over and, hey, get a picture of me. I'm not entirely sure. I don't think this was a staged picture, because there's a guy's arm reaching out of the cell, and Abe turns and looks, and his belt's all out of whack. You know, something, anybody that wears a uniform, you call it the gig line, and you try to make sure your belt buckle's lined up. So I kind of wonder if he was actually arrested this guy, drug him down here, put him in the cell, and then somebody followed him down with a camera and set up and got a picture. Chief, can I get a picture? And he turned around and snap. This is the inside of the jail cells. This led me to believe that sitting out in a dirt field wasn't the permanent state of that jail. Because you can see some structure off in the background there, and I can see a couple of rafters, and there's obviously plumbing because they had a toilet. I don't think they just let it, do what they do. So I got lucky, and a fella sends me this picture. I'll talk about the guy that sent this to me. He's a kind of a county-wide historian. He sends this to me, and this thing is so this article is just chocked full of great information. The jail cells were the first ever built in Orange County in the early 1890s and were located on Sycamore Street in Santa Ana. These were the first Orange County jail. These 3 cells did it for the whole county in 1890s. They were the original cells until the courthouse was built, and there were jail cells in the basement of the courthouse in 1898. So the county then sold the cells to the city of Santa Ana, who used them until they made an arrangement with the county to house their prisoners. And then they sold it to Laguna Beach, and it said in the article said in 1924 for $25. I think the date's off because I don't know. It's sitting there's Abe Johnson. He didn't become chief until 1927. He's obviously in a uniform. So I'm thinking he bought the jail cells in 1927, and the article just got it wrong because the article was written in 1939. Population 1940, 4460. So we have some of these great old accident pictures. One thing, we don't take pictures of us very well, but we do take a lot of pictures out of accident scenes. Memory lane, oh, yes. Here's my next photograph. This, of course, is another group picture of the department. The photograph, I determined, was actually taken in 1944 because Larry Taylor and William Bister were not hired until 1944. And there's a couple of officers missing that were working in 1943. Captain Allenson on the left, he'd been with the department for a long time. George Pletz was with the department. Chief Johnson. Anna Gleed was the first secretary and clerical person working for the department. And then the two officers on the right were new. Ben Sorrells had been with the department for quite a while. And Glenn Craybaugh, not so much. I haven't taken the time to actually look. I tried concentrating on the chiefs, so I don't have a lot of specific information about them. I hope to take some more time on that and kind of track some of these down. We had this great photograph on the wall, and some knucklehead put a sticker on it, and I can't get the sticker off without ruining that part of the picture. But it's Ed Hobart, Paul Johnson, and Charles Bernhardt. But what's really neat is I took it out of the frame, and on the back of the picture it says, this photo was taken in the all-night eatery, the Broiler, that in 1946 or thereabouts was owned by Hal Arnett. From left to right has the names of the officers. I did some work, like I said, on the chiefs, and on Paul Johnson. He's no relationship to Abe Johnson. He's actually from Moline, Illinois. And he first appears in phone books in town in 1930 and lists an occupation at some points as a carpenter and others as an electrician. So he was obviously building homes. He was born in Moline. He was married to a woman named Esther. How do you say that? E-S-T-H-E, Esther? It's got a T-H, like Esther. Originally, let's see, in 1936, he appears to have become a patrolman in Laguna Beach. So I first see him appearing on those resolutions as a paid employee. He became chief of police in November of 1942 at the age of 43 years old. He had one captain and 6 officers working for him at the time. He left the department in March of 1947. This is a little clipping I just thought was interesting of Ann Gleed, and kind of will give you a little picture into what was going on. She was wife of Percy Gleed, Shanghai representative of the British American Tobacco Company. Her and her 3 children were evacuated from Shanghai December 18th, 1940. And what's interesting is you can see all of the ship records of her coming back into the United States in Hawaii, and then coming from Hawaii to here. So it's all documented that she did leave China and came back to America at that date. A year later, Gleed was interned, Piercy, her husband, was interned as a prisoner of the Japanese. And of course, you remember the Japanese invaded China before they did anything else. Her last of only 3 messages received during the 5-year separation came in March of 1944 through the Red Cross. He said he was in Manchuria, and then she didn't hear from him after that. And the story, I can't find any factual information on it, that it took a long time for him to get back to America. So I think to myself, here's a woman with 3 children working at the police department, and here's this good-looking guy, just manly man. Oh, hold on, let me get through this. I found 4 pictures of him, so I did a little animation. There he is smiling. He's a happy guy. He's getting $300 a month. I'd be happy too. He lived at 470 Cypress. But let me get back to Anna Broad Gleed. She resided at 113 Cleo Street. And I was told last week by a lady named Madeline over at the American Legion that there was a horrible scandal a horrible scandal. And in fact, he lost his job in 1947 over it. They did get married, and I actually found some stuff on the internet. They raised her children, and one of the daughters graduated from Laguna Beach High School in 1952. I was also told they moved to Hawaii, so I don't know how long after they had left the area. I also wanted to pop up a few people that were important in the organization. This is Vic Sagan, probably in his first year with his son, Steve. And Steve lives up in Northern California now. We lost Vic in 1982, but he had lived through that whole era. He had ulcer surgery and passed away in the hospital afterward, and then shortly after they came out and realized, oh, ulcers can be cured with an antibiotic. Oh, that's nice. Vic lost his life. And we called him Papa Bear. A little story about Vic. One time he'd bring in donuts every once in a while, and I was a smart-ass little 22-year-old, and he comes into briefing at midnight one night, and he says, you want a donut? So I took a donut. Well, it was like 2 days old or something, so it was a little hard. And I go, yeah. He goes, what's the matter? Are you too good for that? No, it just tastes a little stale, boss. So that night at about 4:30 in the morning, he calls me on the radio to go down in the alleyway. It's Forest Lane now, behind Stottlemeyer's. And I pull up there, and he comes out the back door, and he's got a little paper plate with a donut with steam coming off it. He goes, is that fresh enough for you? Man, that was a good donut, I got to tell you. Another icon of our department was George Pletz. He was hired on November 23rd, 1942, retired in 1972. Real nice man. His starting pay was $140. These guys were living the high life, weren't they? John Zelko had told me when he worked patrol on graveyards, and he said he worked it for 11 years. He was the graveyard lieutenant. He said he had a paper route to help supplement his income, and they'd load the newspapers into the back seat, and he'd drive around delivering newspapers. Yeah, police officers weren't paid a lot of money in those days. George was an interesting guy because he took an interest in crime scene investigation at that time, photography, fingerprinting. He sought out training in those areas. He served as the director of the Orange County Peace Officers Association and the statewide fingerprint Analysts Association, whatever they called them, and he did that for many years. In 1945, he got permission in that little building. He got permission to put a dark room in, and in the left picture, if you look up, and it says in his little history, the chief let him put a dark room in one of the closets. You can see the trays in the little back there. Here, let me put on the laser pointer up there if it works. You can't really see my laser, but right under the laser pointer, you see the trays there. I got a kick out of that. My next featured police officer is Captain Howard Allenson. I mentioned earlier he started with the department, I believe in 1932, although in an article about his retirement, he says it was just him and Chief Johnson in the beginning. Well, that's kind of counter to what I found in some of the articles. It was just Chief Johnson and Art Stromerson in the beginning. So I'm not sure, if that was just something the reporter kind of took from the conversation or what. The records seem to indicate he started in 1932. That doesn't mean he couldn't have started earlier as kind of a reserve or something, because Abe was allowed to hire like part-time police officers. He joined the department in 1932. He was born in 1893. He was from Anita, Iowa, where he was a farmer. In 1930, he lived in Laguna Beach at 385 Locust Street in the house he built in 1928. So I think he arrived in Laguna in 1927, 1928 with his wife Pearl. They had a son and a daughter. And I don't have the address. Here's a little different picture of him with his hat off and looking a little more relaxed. He retired on his birthday, October 29th, 1958. In those days, police officers and firemen had to retire at age 65. So on his 65th birthday, he had to leave the department. He passed away in 1969, and he's buried up in Melrose Abbey in Anaheim. Our next, I'm out of sync here. I just wanted to talk a little bit about that same time in 1946 and 47. They decided they wanted to have a police firing range. They used to go up the hill here somewhere on Temple Hills Drive or Park Avenue up towards the top of the hill, and they're shooting up there. And there was a junior rifle club for the teenagers, and they needed a better place to shoot that was a little safer. So they went up behind the current pageant of the Masters, and they bulldozed. They brought some heavy equipment in, made a little flat area, and bulldozed a road down there. And then the officers, after hours on their days off, built a little shooting range shack there that they could stand and set their ammo and stuff on while they were shooting. These boards here that go into the ground, the cement, you can still at the range today look down, you can see that row of concrete where those things were slid in. They have little pockets on them. Our shoulder patch, the first shoulder patch, again this comes from some notes George Pletz made, appeared in 1947. It was pretty simple. Police officers' uniforms in those days were also dark green like the sheriff's department. This is a young officer wearing one of those green uniforms with that really attractive shoulder patch. The badge was a off-the-shelf badge. There's companies that make these, and they can do a custom one. Like Los Angeles was always the envy of everyone because they had a custom badge, but they were also putting the badge on a lot of officers. This was a standard badge that they sold just about everyone and had the state seal in the center. The little one on the right, that was another off-the-shelf badge. It's very similar to the one that was on that mystery officer earlier, which was one of the things that confused me, made me think he was a Laguna Beach officer. But then when I learned these badges were so common, they were all over the place. Our detectives would get that little badge on the right, and that's what they'd carry with them. Our next and last chief, I'm stopping with 1953 in my little presentation here. Otherwise, we'd be here till 4 in the morning. Was Chief William H. Bachman. His wife was Elizabeth. What's interesting, he started as the chief of police in Laguna Beach when he was 60 years old. So he had been in law enforcement all his life. He was, in 1930, I found an article about him. He had served up until the time he came here. He retired from LAPD. He was the captain over the San Pedro division. And there's a little clip in the paper about him organizing about 20 officers to push a bunch of union people off the street. So I know the guy, and then the phone book records show he was a captain for a long time. Census, 1950, 6661. There's another one of those great old pictures of an accident. 1950, the city started talking about building a city hall and an actual police station with its own jail incorporated into it. And if you were standing on the roof of that original police station looking the other way, you can see the tower of the Fire Station 1. So you're looking across Loma Terrace, and there's this mishmash of junk and stuff back there behind the fire station and kind of going that way. I think it was part of the lumber yard. Am I right or wrong? Anybody know? It's just kind of the area, you know, out here that you're looking at from kind of that angle over there. No, I'm thinking this was, I don't know. There's some structures back there that weren't here when I got hired here. The little larger structure in the background. My laser pointer stinks. But so I'm not quite sure what was there at the time. Hey, who's doing that, man? Don't mess with my presentation. Anyway, whoever took the first picture, and I think it was George Pletz, took this shot too. This is kind of neat, and I'm so familiar with the old station. That concrete footing right in front of the car there that goes from left to right, that was a ramp that you walked up to go into the jail door. So where those men are on the right, that was the entrance into our jail when you brought a prisoner in. And what they're forming up there is the walls to the jail. Our jail has these really thick, like 6 to 10 inch concrete walls that when we rebuilt the building in '92, we kept all of the walls of the jail and just added to them and changed things around a little bit. This photograph was taken in 1951. Of course, now I know all the names of the people in this era. As we move forward, they're a little bit easier to identify. George Pletz is there, Chief Bachman, Captain Allenson. A guy in the white uniform or light colored, probably tan, Walter Unmack. He became a captain later on and was acting chief. John Zelko in the background there, he was a lieutenant forever. And I worked for him when I got hired. Vic Sagan is smiling over there on the right, and I think the guy next to Vic is Waldo. He's doing his Where's Waldo impersonation. You get the department picture and somehow get your face half knocked off. His name's Kearns. These same group of guys. This is like a year later. And if you look just to the woman's left, our right, in the second row, that's Gordon French. On February 13th, 1953, Gordon French was killed. He was 49 years old and had been an officer for only about 3 years. When he lost his life, he had 2 children, young children, and a wife, which is the way it always is when a police officer is killed. They typically have infants. I don't know why. Maybe you make more mistakes when you have young kids. I don't know. There's plenty of newspaper clippings on this. If any of you came to the memorial unveiling out here, I did a little presentation on what happened. Basically, several, Gordon French, George Pletz, Vic Sagan, they had arrested a guy and his mother who had passed a bad check. The guy was an ex-convict. While they're back and trying to book him, Gordon starts to take some property, look through his pockets, and the guy pulls a gun out. He takes Gordon's gun out of his holster and then says he's gonna, he grabs Gordon and says come along or whatever, and they shimmy down the hall, and they're going to come out this door right here, and he pushes Gordon away from him and turns, and just as he turns, Gordon starts to try to jump him, and he turns back around and fires a single round. And what the odd thing is, I don't know where he was hit by the bullet. Some accounts say in the stomach, some say in the femoral artery. I think it must have been an abdominal wound that severed the femoral artery where it goes down through the stomach cavity. But I I couldn't find any really solid information. Unfortunately, that kind of wound, you lose a lot of blood very fast, and they tried to drive him up to Newport Beach, and he bled to death before he got there. And Gordon's sacrifice, at least, was an impetus to build South Coast Hospital and get some energy behind that. And so, you know, it's sad, but, you know, it's probably saved thousands of people's lives over the years having a hospital in town. Back to the mystery officer. You know, who is this guy? And the badge, like I said, the badge is no help. I can't read it. I've you know, looked at the damn thing through a microscope, and you can't read the badge. So that was no good. You know, the other clues, obviously his hat, pants, gun belt, everything he's wearing kind of points to 20s to me. I didn't know a lot about how people dressed, and I thought, what are those goofy looking leggings he has on? And I thought he was some kind of fancy dresser. About 6 months ago, Stan Barry, this is a fellow I mentioned earlier who's kind of an informal historian for law enforcement in the county. Stan works for the district attorney's office, and I got to know him when we hired his wife. She runs our dispatch and communications center, and so Stan's kind of had a little connection with Laguna now, so he knew I was interested in some of the history, so he's sending me pictures every once in a while. The jail article came from Stan. He found that, sent it to me, and I thought, that's really neat. So he sends me pictures every once in a while, and he sends me this picture, and I thought, oh, I've never seen that one before. That's kind of neat. And I'm looking at it, and I get over to the right, and I see that guy standing there, and I like print the picture out. I go run down the hall, and I compare him to the other picture, and it's the same dude. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, I call Stan up. Where'd you get that picture? And he goes, what picture? And I said, the one where the ladies are crossing the street and there's cars. And he says, oh, it was in the Anaheim Police Department has they call it their history room. And they keep old things in there and books and things that they've got and pictures. And he says, he goes, I was just looking through a guy's scrapbook, and it was in the scrapbook. What's his name? I don't know. I'll have to find out. And he said, I just saw that picture and realized it was Laguna Beach. Well, I said, it's the guy we've never been able to identify, you know. And so he gets back with me. The picture was taken on July 24th, 1924. And what it was, they were having some big event down here. The daughters of veterans were baking and brewing today in preparation for the annual Laguna Beach picnic. So they had the picnic the next day, and apparently, let me take this up. There's another picture of him on the left there, and that was for probably the same event. The person that gave the scrapbook had typed up a sheet identifying the different pictures, and all this said Escort Ladies Club. So there's this picture in the scrapbook. It's Louis Hefner, and he's a state traffic officer, Orange County Division, and he worked for them from 1922 to 1926. And there was 5 of them, a captain and 4 officers. And I guess what they did in those days, if you had some big event, they'd send the traffic officers down to help direct traffic and get things moving along. Why he wasn't in his uniform, I don't know. He decided to wear, you know, dirty old baggy clothes. What's really neat is Louis had written this little personal history, and it ends at 1940. And I think it was like a little job sheet, so if he applied for a job, he had his jobs. Well, yeah, that's just how I knew he only worked there from 1922 to 1926. He apparently got into a political fight. But I want you to look here. At 1926, Louis making $225 a month. In 1927, on the resolution, our chief of police was only making $175. Go figure. Yeah. Damn state employees. What's neat about this guy, the more I find out about him, here I wrote the chief of Placentia an email. This guy was the appointed chief of police in Placentia in 1939. Now keep in mind, it was just him and one officer, so it wasn't like a really big department. And then he ran for sheriff in 1942, and he actually has a little notoriety. Him and the other, there's 3 candidates. One guy got elected. The other 2 candidates have some notoriety because they're the first 2 people who lost by such a margin that it didn't get out of the primary. They were defeated in the primary by the guy that ran. This is my last photograph tonight, and then I'll let you get home and to sleep. Our property clerk retired about a year ago, and she's trying to go through things, and she finds a little bag about 6 inches by 6 inches all wrapped up, and she remembers one of the command staff gave it to her years ago, asked her to lock it up and don't lose it. So she looks in it, and it's a bunch of 4x5 or 3x4, whatever the old camera negatives are. They're big, they're big, these big negatives. And she brings it up and gives it to Captain Kravitz, and he starts looking through them. He's like, oh my God, these are like departmental pictures and stuff. So there's a whole bunch of pictures of officers and shifts and different things, and lots of accidents. And in the collection, we find this gem. Somebody got up on the top of Hotel Laguna and shot this picture from the year of the cars in it. I think they're about 1952 is about the newest car I could find. And so it's kind of a really neat photograph, and I thought it was, I wanted to bring it in because if you, oops, is this thing working? If you find the White House sign right there and follow the White House sign up, you can see the Smith House, the Historical Society house, right there in the background. So I thought that was kind of a neat little photograph. Anyway, thank you all. I hope I didn't put anybody to sleep here.
Thank you, Chief. That was just marvelous. I enjoyed that and learned a whole lot. I wonder if we have a little time here, maybe we could have some questions. And why don't you come sit up here, and we'll take that portable mic and pass them around to people who have any questions. All right. So that it gets on the television. So I've got the mic on right over here.
One thing, if anybody has any information where you think I had a hole there and you can fill it in for me, I'd appreciate it. I really would like to learn more about the era, and so any little scrap of information would be greatly appreciated, and it would help fill in the blanks. I plan on writing more of a document on this and doing a disc collection of all the pictures and all of the documents that I come across and all the newspaper clippings, so that the department has a nice history, going forward of that era, because we've never known who these people were. We might have a name or something, but we don't know their background, we don't know their families, and it was really neat tonight to have a couple people come up and saying, oh, I'm related to Ed Hobart, and to find that out, you're like, oh my gosh, people still live in town that knew these guys, and so it's kind of a neat thing. Anyway, go ahead with the questions. Oh, good. I've answered everything already.
I think that what you've done here is a marvelous example of the kinds of things that the society wants to cooperate in and promote here in Laguna Beach to fill out our history. And we can't do all of it. We're glad for people like you that really spend the time coming up with a history. Anybody have questions or comments make with the chief here?
Hi, my name is Carol Lloyd, and my mother is Burlby Beck. Abe Johnson Sr. was her step-grandfather. Her grandmother married him, and my mother knew him most of her life and considered him more of her grandfather than a step-grandfather. But she always shared with me, and right now she has Alzheimer's and she's 93, so she also did the homestead map of Laguna, and we have just a wonderful legacy of her work. But she shared with me always 3 stories about Abe Johnson Sr., the first chief of police, and one was that whenever he was called to come back to the station, the red light on top of Hotel Laguna would always blink, and he would know right away that he was being called to go back. And second, she saw him so many weekends coming down here to see all of her family, but he would always give her a nickel to buy an ice cream cone on the boardwalk. She cherished that time. And then thirdly, at the pavilion, she always shared with me, she says, Carol, he always would have me peek in the window where the dance pavilion was, where they were dancing, and he would say to my mother, he said, and she must have been 7 years old, 8 years old, now close your ears so you don't hear the music, and she would, and she'd look in there, and he goes, now don't they look really silly doing all that stuff? And she just adored him. He was a wonderful man for her to have as a grandfather, and she just had a lot of wonderful stories about him. So
I saw somebody else's hand there,
Behind you.
right behind you there.
Yeah, my name is Bob Cronquist, and I remember going up to the shooting range as a little kid, and we'd collect the bullet shells. Most of them were 22, and then we'd go down to the other end and dig the lead out of the bank. And then the other thing I remember in grade school, taking a tour of the new police station when it opened up.
Okay.
They let us look in the jails and everything, too.
Was the building that you saw in the picture still standing when you were up there?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It was all
It's gone now.
Yeah.
I just don't, it was gone in 1975. I don't know what year it came down, so.
And this was I moved to Laguna in the 50s, and so it was the 1950s, so
Yeah.
it was probably back in the late 50s.
Anyone else like to speak?
I am Carolyn Hobart Fish, and my father was a policeman from, I think it was 1939, 1940, for about 8 years. And when he was about 85 years old, no, it was in 1985, so he was pretty close to, well, late 70s anyway. And he wrote articles for the newspapers, the local newspapers, and there's some fabulous stories about his time in the police department.
Oh, great.
And one was about the red light and how Dorothy Johnson was the night operator at the phone company. And there was not that much law and order in town because people were just coming in. And anyway, and they would have to, he'd be checking the bars, Abe Johnson would. And so in order to get hold of him, didn't know quite where he was, and they didn't have phones, they didn't have any cell phones or anything like that. So they would call Dorothy Johnson, who would call the hotel, and then the light would come on, and Abe Johnson would see the light and then call Dorothy. So that's how that got going. And there's other stories. My father almost shot him one night because they were checking out a robbery, and Abe came in the back door. And he says, I almost shot the chief. Anyway, there's some good stories, and I'm going to make copies and make sure you get them.
That would be fantastic.
Good. Oh, they were in South Coast News, Laguna Beach Post. There was another one too, but there were a whole lot of articles. And now, of course, he saved them, and but they're so old and they're crinkly and they're changing color. And I'm trying to copy them on the copier so that at least we have some record. So I'm trying to do that. There's quite a few articles that he wrote about his lifeguarding. He was one of the first lifeguards in town.
That would be great.
So yeah, we'll see you.
I remember when I was a young officer, I'd gone over to the library, and they used to have the old microfilm over there of old newspapers.
Right.
And I always wondered what happened to them, if that
Yeah, well, there's
still
a few
exists
that we
somewhere.
have. Yeah.
Are they? How far back do they go? Oh, okay. Huh.
Yeah. Cool.
I do have an Abe Johnson story real quick. I read this one little clipping where he talked to the reporter, and he was up in the north end of town, and this car went by and going really fast, and he estimated it was at about 40 miles an hour, and they took off after it, and he said he got up to 50, and he couldn't overtake him. But he finally did. The guy slowed down when he came up to some point in the road, and he managed to get him pulled over. And I got a kick out of that. 50 miles an hour, wow.
Well, this is another story about the light flickering on top of Hotel Laguna. And Chief Spraney got together with myself and my dad. And thank heavens, because he could ask my dad questions that I never even thought to ask. And one of them was, well, Dick, what happened when beer became legal? And he said, oh, all three of us, and Abe Johnson too. So we were all out there working because we thought we'd really be busy, and it wasn't that busy. Well, then what did you do when liquor became legal? He said, well, we thought it wouldn't be that busy, so Abe Johnson went on vacation. And so one other officer wasn't there, so it was just two of us officers. He said, that little red light kept flickering so many times, I have no idea what happened to all those people. And then I do have a question. Did you find out why his badge, I think it says 1?
I
that
don't.
meant anything?
Jim Spriney had a bunch of badges. Do you think that was Dick's badge?
I know it was.
Okay.
Yes, because we gave it to
Okay,
Chief
because
Spraney.
Jim had a bunch of old badges, and I had kind of wondered if that had come from you, but I couldn't
Yes.
remember who you were and or anything, and I thought, yeah, gosh, I wonder if that was actually his badge or not.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
what might have happened was Abe Johnson's badge might have said Chief of Police, and maybe it didn't have a number or something, and you know, it's hard to tell sometimes. And maybe Art Stromerson had badge 1, and when he left, Dick got Art's badge, because there's some departments, they'll, you know, the senior guy gets badge 1 and they move all the badges down. So he may have got that because he was the most senior guy at the time, and then they let him keep it at the end of his term.
Okay, good, thanks.
Anyone else? Well, I want to again have us join together and thank the chief for a marvelous presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I'd like to remind all of you that our next meeting is March 10th, and there will be information about it in the newsletter. And I hope if you haven't joined yet, you will join tonight, or take the little coupon home and join through the mail. And we're very happy you came tonight. Thank you. Good night.